Hi, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about levels. Right now, our game only has a single level, right? We have one space that our character can move around in. And we want to create a system so that if our player can beat this level, they progress on to another part of the game. Now, in order to beat that level, we have to think about what is the objective. The objective could be something like defeat a certain amount of enemies. Like maybe you have to destroy all the enemies that are on the screen. Or maybe you simply have to get to a certain part of the level to move on. Like maybe there's a door or a gate that pushes you to the next section. We'll talk more about the objectives in a minute, but first, we're going to create the system that allows us to move from one level to another level. And to do that, we have to talk a little bit about how Construct is organized. In Construct, you basically have two components. You have the layout, and the layout's like the physical map of your level, right? It's where all of the sprites are, all the objects. That's where you lay out the level itself. And then we have the event sheet. And the event sheet is where all of our code is. That's what powers the game, right? Those two things go hand in hand. We have layout 1 and we have event sheet 1. All the information in event sheet 1 is what tells layout 1 what to do. Now, if you look over up in the top right window, you'll see a layouts folder and you'll see an event sheets folder. Right now, we just have one of each, which means we just have one level. But if I add a second layout and a second event sheet, that can be my level 2. If I right-click on the layouts folder and click add layout, it's going to ask you, do you want to add an event sheet too? And yeah, let's add an event sheet. Now we have layout 2. And layout 2 is just a big empty white space. We can decide what layout 2 looks like. It can be similar to layout 1. We can put in the same kind of objects again by dragging and dropping them from the window over here. Or you can build something totally different for layout 2. Maybe it's a shop or a menu or something like that. But each layout represents a different section of the game. And each layout has an event sheet that goes along with it. Now notice the event sheet 2 that we just created that goes along with layout 2 is empty. It says this is an empty event sheet. There's no code here. And you might be thinking like, do I have to rewrite all the stuff that I made in event sheet 1 to make it work in event sheet 2? And you don't. There's a kind of a shortcut, so you don't have to redo everything every time you make a new stage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually rename event sheet 1. Event sheet 1 is where all of our important code is, right? This is the stuff that we want to have work in every level across our entire game. So what I'm going to do is rename it, and I'm going to call it the core event sheet. Now the name doesn't really matter, but what I mean by core event sheet is like, this is the core code. This is the foundational code that we're going to have in every level. Now what I can do is I can take that core event sheet and I can include it into level 2, into event sheet 2. If we double click on event sheet 2, right click anywhere in the empty white space, and you'll see an option for include event sheet. Let's include, and you'll see the option for core event sheet. Click OK. Up at the top, we see that gray bar that says this is including the core event sheet. All this information is automatically now included in event sheet 2. So now if I were to take my goblin character and put it into event sheet 2, it would work. It would automatically have the same controls and same animations. Great. Now, if I go back up here, let's click on layout 1. Now, if you look on the top left, we have options to rename the layout if we want to. And we also have an option to change which event sheet this layout is connected to. Now, because we changed the name of event sheet 1 to core event sheet, our layout 1 is using the core event sheet, which right now is fine. But in a minute, it's going to be important for us to have a separate event sheet for every layout, for every level. And the core event sheet is going to be kind of floating, doing its own thing, powering all the different levels. So what I'm going to have you guys do is right-click over here on event sheets. Let's add an event sheet, and we'll keep the name event sheet 1. We want to link event sheet 1 to include all the core event sheet stuff. So I'm going to include event sheet, core event sheet. Now the last thing I have to do to set this up is to go to layout 1. Over here on the top left, it's going to say which event sheet do we want to use? We want to use event sheet 1. So as a quick kind of recap, what we have is the core event sheet that powers everything. And then for each layout, and we can make as many as we want, we have individual event sheets that correspond to each one. And if you need to change which event sheet is linked to which layout, just click on it, go over to the top left, and you can decide which one is connected, I recommend keeping all the numbers the same. Layout 1 goes with event sheet 1, layout 2 goes with event sheet 2. And each event sheet includes the core. Perfect. Now, our next step is going to be to create the system that triggers when the player moves from one layout to another, from one level to the second level. And to do that, we're going to add a little bit more to the core event sheet. Whenever we're adding something that we want to have true for all levels, we'll put it in the core event sheet. And what we're going to add here is a system that whenever our player defeats an enemy, it'll give them a point. And if they get a certain amount of points, then they'll beat the level. Now, the first thing we're going to do, actually, before we create this event, we're going to create an instance variable, and we can put it right on our main character. So what you want to do is go over to layout 1 and make sure that your main character is selected. We're going to add an instance variable, and I'm going to call it enemies defeated. The number of enemies that have been defeated, you can call it enemy kill count, you can call it objective, whatever you want to call it. But this is the number that's going to represent how many enemies we've defeated in the level. It's a number, initial value 0, click OK. Now in the core event sheet, I'm going to add an event for enemy 1. And if you scroll down about halfway, maybe past halfway, you'll see an option for onDestroyed. OnDestroyed means whenever this enemy is destroyed, we can have this action trigger. And the action is going to be for our main character. We're going to go down to the instance variables section. We're going to go to add to. We're going to say that we're going to add to the enemy's defeated number a value of 1. This event saying that whenever an enemy 1 is destroyed, then our instance variable on our main character for the amount of enemies defeated goes up by 1. Let's do the same thing for enemy 2. Add event, enemy 2, on destroyed, add action for the main character, add to, enemies defeated. And we could do that for enemy 3 as well. Perfect. Now, no matter what level you're on, whenever you destroy an enemy, you get a point for it. Now, let's think about layout 1. This is our first level. How many enemies does our player have to defeat before they get to go to level 2? You can set it to the amount of enemies that there are in your level total. Like for mine, I have seven enemies? So maybe we could have it so the player has to defeat all 7 enemies before they complete the level and move on to level 2. Right now, just to test it, I'm going to set that number lower so I don't actually have to spend the time playing the level. I'm going to say that maybe the player only has to defeat 2 enemies to move on. Now, this next part, I'm going to put into event sheet 1. Now, event sheet 1 is the event sheet that corresponds with layout 1, right? The reason why I'm not putting this in the core event sheet, I'll explain more in a minute. But let's go over to event sheet 1 and let's add an event. I'm going to make this event for the player character. I'm going to go down to the instance variable section, and I'm going to compare an instance variable. The instance variable I'm going to compare is the enemy's defeated number. And I'm going to say whenever that is equal to or greater or equal to a certain number, let's say 2, then we can add an action, go to the system, and if I go down to the layout section, there's an option for go to layout. And let's say layout 2. What this event has done is it's checked to see how many enemies I've defeated. And if the amount I've defeated is equal or greater than 2, then the system takes us to level 2. Now, the reason why I put this in event sheet 1 and not in the core event sheet is because if I put it in the core event sheet, it'll be true for all the levels. Now, say hypothetically, in level 2, we want the player to have to defeat 5 enemies instead of 2 enemies. We want to have that flexibility. So this will only stay true for level 1, and then in level 2, we can make it something different. Defeat more enemies, or maybe collect something different, or whatever it might be. So you want to put that in event sheet 1. Great. Now let's try it out. Let's go to layout 1, our first level, and let's click play. I'm going to defeat a couple enemies. Maybe. There's one. And a second enemy. and I've instantly just been transported to an empty white void, right? Which seems like the game broke, but it didn't. It took me to level 2. Level 2 is just empty, right? There is no level 2 yet. It's just a white space. So it did work. We just need to make a level 2 now. Now, the other thing that I'm going to mention here is that it was very sudden, right? As soon as I destroyed enemy 2, it instantaneously took us to the next level. What we're going to do in the next video is create a system that's a little bit more gentle, a little bit more smooth. Maybe a message pops up on the screen that says like, stage completed, and maybe it fades out and then slowly fades us into the next stage. So we'll add more to that to make it a little bit more seamless, but for now that works. We're also in a future video going to start building out level 2 by dragging and dropping stuff like enemies and our main character and walls into that level. But we'll cover that in a future video. All right, thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.